Committee members, everyone ready? Lovely. Are we ready to go live? We up. Super. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome either in person or virtually to Pathfinder House in Huntingdon. I would like to begin by welcoming those members of the press and public who have either joined us here in person or those who are watching our meeting on live stream. This is the meeting of the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority Transport and Infrastructure Committee. My name is Councillor Anna Smith. I'm the representative for Cambridge and the chair of this committee. The Combined Authority allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and use social media during the meeting. Can I ask that everyone present turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place? There are no fire drills scheduled today, so if the alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting and we will move to the muster point, which is on the High Street. And I would remind members and officers that this meeting will be recorded. So we start with item 1, which is announcements and apologies for absence. So our first announcement, Councillor Seaton is unable to attend the meeting today in person, but is joining us remotely. Thank you, Councillor Seaton. And we can see you nice and clearly up on the screens. Remote attendance will mean that he is unable to vote, but he will be able to contribute to our discussions, including some of the items that are very pertinent to Fenland District Council this afternoon. Would the Governance Manager let us know of any apologies and substitutions, please?
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Rebecca Stevens, the Business Board representative, and from the Mayor, Dr. Nick Johnson, and also from Councillor Wakeford, and we have Councillor Sanderson acting as his substitute today.
And welcome, Councillor Sanderson. It's good to see you again. So we now move on to item 2, which are declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare a disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest in any item being considered today? Councillor Seaton, you've got your hand up.
Declare that I am a trustee of the FAC Community Travel Service.
Thank you. I wonder if there's a way, actually, here's a homework task for our legal team, whether if we've got some things that are kind of rolling items, we can have them somehow attached to each of our agendas as something that's taken as read and disclosed en masse for a series of meetings. That might be interesting to look at, as whether that's something we're able to do. Right, we now move on to, are there any other declarations of interest? Okay, so we now move on to item 3. Item 3 is the minutes and action log. Is the committee happy to approve the minutes from the 26th of June as an accurate record and to note the action log? Agreed. Thank you. And this is a particularly important one as there is not a recording in place for the whole of the meeting. So the minutes become particularly key in our record of those discussions. So I see no objection. We'll take the minutes as approved and the action log noticed. We now move on to public questions. We have received 4 questions from members of the public, all of which have been published on the website and circulated to members of the committee. For those of the questioners who are not here either online or in person, the Governance Manager will read out that question and questions will be taken in the order that they were submitted, and I will give a response to each one in turn. These responses will be published on the website after the meeting. So question 1 is from Michael Farmilo. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Michael, a resident of Peterborough who is not here today. So Jo, over to you, please.
Thank you. The question is, access to buses is not easy for wheelchair users in the Peterborough area, as the ramp has to be let down manually by the driver, and often the slope up to the bus from the pavement is quite steep. When providing new buses, will the authority now require bus operators to provide new buses which meet the same standards as those used in London, i.e. ramps which are operated remotely by the driver and which slide out to the pavement and allow a gentle slope to access the bus?
Thank you, Michael. And this is a really important question, so I'm very grateful that you've brought it. So it's worth setting the context to start with. The significant majority of buses in the existing bus network in Peterborough are, as the majority of buses are across our region, operated on a commercial basis without involvement from the combined authority. And I believe most of them are operated by Stagecoach in the Peterborough region. We are committed to a future bus network that has improved accessibility for all. And you'll see there are several items coming up around the nature of our bus network. And everybody needs to be able to access critical public transport. I'm a former teacher and I've worked with young people who have struggled to catch buses. And it really is a problem when buses are not sufficiently accessible. So we do appreciate that. All buses in England have to operate to a standard set by the Department for Transport, and officers will, and we've already been discussing this, be undertaking further work in due course on those standards that we can set to improve the bus accessibility on contracted services. Now, contracted services currently make up approximately 12% of our network as per mileage operated. So the ones that we currently have direct control over is very small. As well as ensuring accessibility is in the planning for potential future governance models for the bus network. I'm choosing my words very carefully there, but you'll be aware there are other things on the agenda where we are discussing those governance models. The combined authority is also undertaking initial work on bus stop and shelter locations across the region, and there was some money in the budget for this, and we're looking at working with constituent council partners. Now, as part of that work, officers want to identify locations that would benefit from raised curbs to assist with accessibility. So, Michael, if you're able to get in touch with us and share if there are specific locations that you or people you've been speaking to are particularly concerned about, then hopefully we can start looking at those. I would want to point out that there are a lot. I can't remember the exact number. I'm sure our team know of bus stops within the region. So we won't be able to deal with everything immediately, but we do want to set priorities. So perhaps if you could get in touch with either us directly or with Councillor Jamil, and then we can have a conversation further. Thank you. Now, question 2 is from Tom Watts, who is a resident of St Neots and is in the room, and I think is going to do a kind of double act with Councillor Davenport-Ray. So I'm welcoming them both to the table.
So Tom has submitted a very good question, but he's asked me to read it out for him today. The Combined Authorities Local Transport and Connectivity Plan, approved in November 23, calls for, and I quote, lobbying the EWR company and government to provide an appropriate station in the St Neots vicinity. This is on page 8 of the Huntingdonshire section. As the plan was approved several months after EWR published their preferred route, including a new station at Tempsford, does the Combined Authority consider that the Tempsford station meets this description, despite its distance and relative inaccessibility from St Neots? If not, will the Combined Authority lobby for an additional station between Tempsford and Camborne that more directly serves St Neots, for example, in the Wintringham area, where the line will run parallel to the A428, especially in light of the extensive development currently ongoing in this area?
Thank you, Tom. And thank you too, because in your question, you've referred to lobbying, and that's an important phrase, because of course, this is not a project that the Combined Authority are directly controlling. So this does become about the lobbying and the discussions and making sure that as much as possible, we are able to represent and the views of members of the Combined Authority, but also hopefully to have some leverage. So I'm going to give you quite a short answer to start with, which is our officers, some of whom are in the room here, are actively engaging to ensure that our concerns are heard and addressed. It's really important that they are. Now, you mentioned the issues around access to a railway for the St Neots area. Now, at the moment, of course, it's Tempsford that's being suggested for that. In short, those plans for the access route have been deemed inadequate by the combined authority as it stands at the moment. We do not believe they give adequate access for people from St Neots. So we have emphasised this must have urgent attention, and we must work on rectifying that, basically. So that's where we are right now. Do you have a follow-up?
The follow-up question would be, how will the public and residents of St. Neots find out about your conversations and what progress you might make?
Thank you. Now, I can't answer that immediately. I don't know whether it's appropriate to defer to anyone that might know the answer, such as Judith, who's got a hand up to be able to share that. If I'm legally allowed to do that, I'm getting nods. Right, Judith, over to you.
Thank you. So I think it's worth saying that there is an ongoing set of meetings happening with East West Rail with officers at the moment. I know the Mayor has met with them recently, and indeed the Chief Exec is meeting this week. Obviously, as a result of that, and this being such a significant piece of infrastructure potentially crossing the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough area, we will be bringing regular updates to this meeting, and obviously the papers are published. So please do watch at the following meetings, and then that way you'll be able to get an update and perhaps have a follow-up question if you have one.
Thank you. And I'm sorry that you don't get a follow-up to the follow-up, but hopefully it's the start of a dialogue and not the end. And thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate that. And it's really nice to have people coming to the committee to ask their questions. It really adds something. So question 3 is from Anthony Carpen. Is Anthony online or? Okay.
So question 3, what analysis and assessment has the CPCA made of the number of private non-public commuter buses currently operating in the CPCA area, along with further proposed commuter bus services attached to planning applications for new sci-tech parks and employment sites in and around Cambridge?
Thank you, Anthony. So I think to underline the most important principle here is, and it comes back to what I gave in an answer to the first question, we do want to ensure that where feasible, all residents have got access to good quality public transport that enables journey for education, work and leisure, and for any other purpose that I haven't encompassed there that is also a relevant use for transport. We do know that there are businesses that have private arrangements to provide specific transport for employees. Anthony, like me, you are from the Cambridge area, and we're obviously aware there are quite a few commuter buses that are operated specifically in the Cambridge area. And I don't know, potentially those might be what you're thinking of at this point. So we do need to undertake further detailed analysis of those services to inform our future planning. One of the things about the network as it stands is we have the commercial network, we have the combined authority supported network, and then we have a range of other transport options which are being operated, such as home to school transport, such as health transport, such as commuter transport. I think all of us, it's in everyone's interest to see if there are overlaps there that become practical and useful for all of us. So in terms of that subtext of your question, are we going to look at this? Well, absolutely. I think we need to look at how we can all work together more effectively. So there's a list of improvements from the mayoral precept proposals. When those are delivered later this year, that should improve some connections across the region. And we hope that in some cases that may remove the need for employers to be investing in separate private arrangements. We also do need to conduct a review on the flow of investment into public transport from future development currently. We need to ensure that where feasible, a public transport option that's accessible for residents who wish to use it is the preferred option to encouraging sustainable transport use. And I think there's quite a bit of work to be done in that area too. So thank you. Then I think we have question 4 from Paul Hollingshurst. Sorry, Paul.
Sorry, question 4. Rail Future East Anglia has been campaigning for the reopening of the railway from March to Wisbech for almost a decade, seeing a series of studies by Cambridgeshire County Council and the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority build a good case for the reopening, with the preferred scheme identified as a through service from Wisbech to Cambridge. This is similar to the June 2024 reopening of the 5-mile line from Leven to Thornton in Scotland, with through services to Edinburgh. At the Transport and Infrastructure Committee meeting on the 15th of March 2023, it was stated that the Combined Authority is working with Network Rail around the appraisal of options for the link between Wisbech and March, and a further report will be provided to the committee in summer 2023. A year later, it is summer 2024, and there is still no sign of the report. Delays were announced at the September 2023 TIC meeting. Then at the November 2023 meeting, it was reported that it would be available by the 31st of March 2024. Since then, there has been nothing in the agenda for the June 2024 or the July 24 meetings, and it no longer appears in the agenda plans. Please, can you provide a full and transparent status update, including the current thinking and how the interim Wisbech to March shuttle being evaluated in the current Network Rail and CPCA study would evolve into the desired through service to Cambridge once the Ely area capacity enhancement is complete?
Thank you, Paul. I've got a relatively long answer to this, and I suspect it still won't have sufficient detail. So please do get in touch if you'd like to chat about this further. So the Combined Authority clearly, and I want to say this on record, it's really important that we're all clear about this, remains steadfast in its commitment to the Ely area capacity enhancement. It absolutely underscores the importance of high priority transport projects to the incoming Labour government, and everything we're hearing is that rail is not going to be any less important in this new government, and I suspect significantly more so. Simultaneously, the Combined Authority is advancing the development of a passenger transport link between Wisbech and March, which is needed to boost connectivity and productivity in the region. Now, a comprehensive report was presented at the committee meeting in November 2023 at our request as a committee, which gave an update on the appraisal work conducted by Network Rail at that point. And this report evaluated 4 core options. So I'm going to go through them just for the purpose of the record. I know that you're aware of them yourself, Paul. Option 1, establishment of a heavy and i.e. conventional rail transport link. Option 2, the implementation of a tram train, which will be a hybrid heavy oblique stroke light rail system, with sub-options for connectivity with the existing local network. Option 3, the development of a light rail or tram transport system. And option 4, the introduction of a very light rail transport system. Following the publication of this report, the Combined Authority has contributed its collaboration with Network Rail to perform a strategic comparison of these options. Now, during the meeting, the Combined Authority also discussed exploring alternative transport solutions such as autonomous vehicles, which could provide a potentially innovative and cost-effective alternative, and I say could because decisions have not been made, to rail-guided systems for the Wisbech to March route. These alternatives may offer a faster, cheaper and superior service compared to traditional transport types, which is why we're keen for them to be in the mix as we discuss the various options. Additionally, there is significant potential to extend these options beyond the March Wisbech corridor, which would potentially enhance rural connectivity to other Fenland towns and cities and offer a green transport solution for cities like Ely, Peterborough and Cambridge. This approach represents a significant advancement in rural and intra-urban connectivity. So we want to make sure everything is on the table as we discuss options at this point. So we have commissioned further work to compare all options. And this analysis will be able to facilitate the informed decision-making by these committee members, so that we have a really clear options appraisal on everything that might be open to us and to the region. And we're really able to prioritise what is best for the wider network and for local people and businesses. Thank you, Paul. Okay, I think that's it on the public questions, isn't it? Thank you. So we now move on to the Combined Authority Forward Plan, which is item 5. Are there any questions or comments on the forward plan? Okay, in which case I'm assuming we can take that as noted. Thank you. So we're now moving to the director's highlights report, which is item number 6, I think. Item 6. Judith Barker, Executive Director for Place and Connectivity, will introduce the report. Judith.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll just say a few words by way of introduction before taking any questions through you, Chair. And obviously, you'll see that in the report, we've started with a note of the impact of the new government, and particularly the link to the 5 high-level priorities that have been set out by the new Secretary of State a couple of weeks ago. And as the Chair mentioned, there's a focus on those 5 priorities. There's a focus on rail performance, and you'll be aware of the proposals around GB Rail. There's a focus on bus services, which is obviously significant for later on our agenda, and particularly enabling areas that can't currently consider franchising to look at franchising. Talking about transforming infrastructure and how that can bring forward in both employment and housing. Greening transport, which is obviously a key objective of our local transport and connectivity plan, and also integration, which was obviously part of what the Chair was just mentioning in terms of Wisbech to March, but part of our wider agenda again to connect more effectively rural and urban areas with multi forms of transport and active travel. So I think that's a backdrop to and clearly a change from where we were when we met in June. And clearly it's moving forward within that framework that a number of the other points are made. You'll be aware of the shared ambition work and that many colleagues and board members have participated in. And of course, the work that we're also doing that's on the paper about the infrastructure delivery framework, which is looking at those gaps that there are in terms of enabling us to grow and then identifying what work we need to do to work up schemes that could potentially attract both private and public money in order to unlock growth and across the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough area. I also wanted to pick up that issue of how we influence nationally, and that's perhaps drawn out by the National Infrastructure Commission visit on the 1st of August, when we're taking advantage of an opportunity to talk with the National Infrastructure Committee, which provides strategic guidance on infrastructure issues to government. And we're meeting with them on the 1st of August in order to talk about issues around electricity generation and supply. You will see there are also updates on particular projects, the Peterborough Station Quarter work that we're doing across the Greater Cambridge area on the transport strategy, but also the work that we've done across buses. And in particular, I wanted to make mention of the fact we've now had over 15,000 applications for the Tiger cards, with over 13,000 now issued, and also the work that's ongoing in terms of the procurement for 30 precept routes, which will then be phased in from September to start actually delivering those services to residents. So at that point, Chair, I'll pause and hand back to you for any questions.
Thank you, Judith. And I have to say it's fabulous to see so many transport announcements coming through so quickly with this new administration, and some things that I suspect will be very close to the heart of members of this committee too. So that's really encouraging. So I need a pen. Has anyone got one they can let me have? I'm really sorry, I always do this to you, don't I? I'm just going to take questions in batches if I'm able. So I think Councillor Sanderson, sorry, you had it indicated to speak. Councillor Jamil, have we got anyone else wish to speak at this point? Councillor Sharp, we'll take 3 to get going. And then, depending on how detailed those are, we might take Councillor Shaler before we pass back to questions. Councillor Sanderson, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think the Tiger card, that's an excellent initiative to get young people using buses, but obviously reaching them will be difficult, particularly with advertising. Have we considered advertising at the bus stops?
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Jamil.
It was a similar question on the Tiger cards. I know you said we've hit 15,000. I just want to know if you can have a breakdown, because it could be 15,000 all in Cambridge. I want to see this go right across the county. If you've got any breakdown of where these people are actually using it, because we want them to use them all over the county. And if they're just using one, then obviously we're not doing our job properly, because we need to maybe go back, advertise. And the second part, more of a statement, is that, you know, I welcome the visit for members to the station quarter, because I know it was postponed because of the general election.
Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions. One, on the Greater Cambridge transport strategy, is the area, when we're saying Greater Cambridge, is that the area basically that the GCP covers, or is that going to be wider? Because certainly the area I represent in East Cambs obviously commutes into there. And the second question is on the preset funded bus network improvements, in terms of getting more details about the funding, whether we're going to be able to fund all of those. And obviously obviously we can't announce things at the moment because we haven't got all the details, but obviously it's don't want to sort of build people's hopes up and suddenly we cut it off because we can't fund all of them. So it'd be useful to get a heads up on that, I think. Thank you.
I think we will take Councillor Shayler's as well, because they're all quite crisp questions. So Councillor Shayler, put you in this tranche as well.
Thank you very much. First, I want to applaud the new priorities from the new Transport Secretary. And my question relates to how this could change some of our ambitions. And I feel like we could go further, especially with Wisbech Rail, in fact, and to continue on with the kind of positioning that Councillor Sharp has. We have a region where we have different needs and abilities in different parts, and the idea of joining them up so that prosperity is increased everywhere. And for instance, in the Cambridge area, we have huge pressure on accommodation for businesses and people. Go a little bit further north, then it's the opposite. And we have an export of educated people from Finland, for instance, where they can't find work. So just having decent infrastructure, including Wisbech Rail, to join these parts up just seems like a no-brainer in terms of prosperity, increasing prosperity across the whole region. And of course, Peterborough has a different set as well. Joining all these areas up together is in all of our interests.
There we are. If I could just add in as well to your point, Councillor Jamil, about the station quarter, we have a weekly diary meeting with myself and the Mayor and the Mayor's office. And in fact, we were talking exactly about when can we get that station quarter visit rearranged. It's been a huge frustration. There's been so many things that we had to move because of the election. And whilst, you know, democratic processes, of course, must take priority, there's quite a lot to get into the calendar. And I absolutely agree. Personally, I think we should have that meeting as soon as we're able. But Judith.
Thank you. That's a wide range of questions to come back. If I can start by Councillor Sanderson's question about the Tiger cards. I've opened some information that I've got regarding the progress on Tiger cards. It doesn't contain a geographical spread, but that's certainly something that I can request, because obviously we have the postcode, so we can do that analysis. So I can take that point away. You also specifically mentioned advertising. One of the difficulties we had when we launched it, the launch was originally scheduled for the 3rd of June, and then because of the general election, we had to move incredibly quickly and got it launched on the 29th of May, which then meant that some of the things that we perhaps would have wanted to do had it not been in a pre-election period, we didn't do. So that's now being reviewed, and we can look at and improve what we're doing. Certainly in some places there have been leaflets on buses and so on. So we can look at that, look at the geographical spread, and it's absolutely part of what the communications team are doing, which is to look at what's worked and then see how we can build on that. So I really hope, in answer to both those questions, means we can pick that up and move on to the next stage to see if we can get another 15,000 young people benefiting from that scheme. I would absolutely endorse what the chair said in terms of the Peterborough Station Quarter. We have an officer workshop in the middle of August with Peterborough City Council colleagues, and really look forward to making sure that all members have got the opportunity to fully understand that very significant project in Peterborough and the funding and the advancement of that project. In answer to Councillor Sharp raising a very important question about the scope of the Greater Cambridge Transport Strategy, the work's at a very early stage at the moment, but what we are absolutely doing is begin to build up some work, all of the existing evidence that already has been developed, and also thinking about what the timetable would look like for the development of that strategy, and indeed what the scope would be and how we would engage people. And clearly, as you say, Councillor Sharp, there's a Greater Cambridge area is the most immediate, but of course it's the functional economic area, and so many places flow in and flow out of Cambridge, both within Cambridgeshire and indeed neighbouring authorities as well. So what we are looking at is an engagement process that involves both the key authorities within the immediate Greater Cambridge area, but also more widely, because clearly it will impinge and affect their residents and businesses. So that work hasn't been completed, but it's absolutely part of our thinking, and to reach out, as I say, not only across Cambridgeshire, but more widely. There was also a question about the preset funding and having an update on that, so you're able to share it. So there's actually, the process is going on at the moment to, we are actively out procuring those services at the moment. And your question was particularly about, do we know if they'll all be funded? Because obviously we have a fixed budget and we're out to procurement, and some of that's going to depend on the pricing. At the moment, the indications are positive, but until that procurement exercise is complete, we won't know for an absolute fact. But we are confident that those services that we have gone out to procurement are affordable within the budget. Clearly, we have to keep that situation under review, and I review that regularly with my colleague Andrew Highfield, who's worked with his team to do a huge amount of work to undertake that procurement. Now, obviously, during any procurement exercise, there will be kind of things to consider. We have to work very closely alongside the existing services that are already there to make sure that there's no, there's no difficulties for those, and looking very carefully at routes and so on. And so where there's had to be tweaks to routes, there might be some that take a little bit longer than others, but we're working that through, and we'll be able to bring an update. I think, is it the 11th of September when we're due to meet again, but we'll certainly have an update for that meeting as well. And then the last point, I think, from Councillor Shaler was just looking at the impact of the 5 priorities of the new government and how that might affect CPCA. And indeed the work that we're doing on transport and connectivity. So I think from an overarching perspective, in many ways, the alignment between what's in the new government priorities and our own thoughts is very strong around the rail, around active travel, around greening transport. So I think and the need to invest in infrastructure to support development, all of those things are helpful. And I didn't even mention in that the position on bus franchising, which we're of course discussing later. There's a strong alignment, and that means that in writing to the new government, I know the Mayor is emphasising, for instance, the importance of Ely to that rail infrastructure, the significance of our bus reform proposals, and the wider sort of connectivity, but also more widely than that, because as you talked about the different issues in different areas. So in some cases that might be looking at how we can work more effectively through the bus network to deliver connectivity for people reaching education, but it can also be around how we can put forward business cases for development along the Wisbech Beach to March route, as well as in Peterborough, but also bringing forward infrastructure in terms of planning, looking at such things as how we can advance and support the Fens Reservoir. So all of that is important. Clearly, there's still going to be a very strong onus on value for money, and I think we would welcome that. That's absolutely baked into our single assurance framework, and it's something that we consider absolutely part of our work. So what we have to do is consider how we can bring forward all of that sort of transport and connectivity agenda with the opportunity of these 5 priorities still being absolutely mindful of that value for money and how we attract private sector investment as well as public sector investment into our area. And I think one small stage that we'll have on that journey is the government has requested CPCA to produce a local growth plan like it has to all mayoral combined authorities, and we'll be looking forward to including those type of activities and that alignment in that local growth plan, which of course come before the board, certainly if not in September, very shortly after that.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And Councillor Jamil, I think that's an incredibly good spot on whether we can do some mapping geographically on take up of Tiger cards. Certainly anecdotally, I've seen pictures of people holding up Tiger cards kind of with excitement across the region, but I don't think we should be relying on anecdotes here. And I think it's a really good idea to be able to look at that. As you say, that allows us all to come in on the agenda and support that and ensure our young people are all across the region benefiting. So I think it looks like you have a follow-up. Is that correct?
There you go. Yeah, it's just that I just think that the election, I don't want to say came at an unfortunate time being a member of the Labour Party, but, you know, I just think it would have worked a lot easier had this been done earlier in the year. But I understand, you know, that we did try.
Yes, and I suspect there are people from across the political spectrum who were slightly surprised by the timing of that. But I think we have more questions. I can certainly see Councillor Seaton has his hand up. Are there any more questions and comments in the room? And Andy as well. Any more for any more? Right, we'll take Councillor Seaton and Andy, and then we'll go back to you, Judith.
Thank you, Chair. My question really is about funding. I had a recent meeting with some of the officers from the CPCA, and whereas the funding is for transport, whether it's rail or whether it's buses, is for the whole of the combined authority. The perception often is within the rural areas that the majority of that funding is going to the city and the urban areas. Rightly or wrongly, that perception is out there. My question at the recent meeting was there a possibility of a budget within the overall budget, which was for the rural areas, so that we could identify what monies were being spent in the rural areas, not just Fendon, but the other rural areas within the combined authority, including, you know, finance from some of the adjacent councils, where there is a crossover between the services running into the combined authority area. So I just wonder whether there is a possibility of looking at that, so that, you know, we can identify exactly what is being done in the rural areas.
Thank you, Andy.
I have a couple of points. I'll try not to ramble. First, to Councillor Sharp's point, I completely agree. I think the Greater Cambridge area, one of the things it has done is it's done a mapping of where employees live. And we're seeing an increasing number of employees living in areas of East Cambridgeshire, also Huntingdonshire. So we should look at where they're living, but secondly, why are they living there? There's a reason they're living there, other than there being a nice place to live. So if we can understand that and why they're living in those areas, why shouldn't they be living in other areas? So there's more than one lesson you can get from where people live. I think my second point around Councillor Shayla's point, I think we shouldn't underestimate the importance of the local growth plan. In a few agenda items time, hopefully not too many hours time, we'll be talking about the England's Economic Heartland report. And I'll highlight several things in that, but it makes that direct link between economic growth and transport links. So it's important that we get those ones right. And that's what I'd like to see. So I think, Judith, you answered my question, which was going to be, what is the time frame of this local growth plan? So there's a huge opportunity to link our transport schemes with our economic growth schemes within the structure provided by the England's Economic Heartland, and looking at where the people live throughout the combined authority area.
Every conversation I have with business groups appears to always come down to if we want to get this right for our businesses and therefore for our workers and for employment across our region and for prosperity, we've got to sort out the infrastructure and we've got to sort out the skills. And I hear that time and time again. So I think this is a really helpful thing that you've raised here, Andy. Thank you. Judith.
Thank you, Chair. In terms, Councillor Jamil, of the point that you made about the getting the word out about the Tiger cars, I know work was done to contact all of the school, well, the sort of secondary schools, colleges, etc., to get the route out through there. I think there's clearly another opportunity as we go towards I can't believe I'm saying this, but the school's going back in September. We clearly, when I speak to colleagues in the communications team, to think about how they can build on the success they've already had with a kind of next wave of take up before going back to school, I think it's a really helpful idea. Councillor Seaton, in terms of, I'm really pleased that colleagues in Fenland are having regular meetings with yourself and also colleagues from CPCA, because I think as we've discussed, that closer working is really key to going forward and making sure that we can effectively meet the needs of rural areas. I think the two key things that I would say, and of course there's always part of a wider discussion, but I think the two key things that I would focus on in terms of looking at the impact of what we do and what we have done and what we do going forward in terms of rural areas is looking at the monitoring and evaluation, making sure that we can tell the story of what we're doing and what we have done and where it's had an impact. And I think that's going to be really important going forward. And obviously key to that is the future investment we need. Now, we need to think very carefully. We are bringing forward business cases to fund projects, and they have to be tested for value for money. And we need to be aware of what the geographical spread of those are, and we need to be held to account for that. And I think there's ways that we can demonstrate how we're using our money in rural areas, how we're monitoring the impact in rural areas, and looking at how we do that. And we can also always look at how we improve that and how we consider some of the difficulties that rural areas have and how that's looked at as part of a business case development, because it will always be the case that investment in rural areas may impact a fewer number of people. And that might mean it's harder to bring forward some of those business cases, but we need to be shrewd enough and adaptable enough to understand that and think about how we can consider that in a value for money calculation. So I think the point that you make is really important, and we need to be really mindful of that as we roll into the implementation of our single assurance framework and the oversight of the business cases with even greater scrutiny than they've received before. The final point that Andy made, so I would say one of the things we focused on in terms of buses is that kind of where people live and also the purpose of their journey, and understanding that I think is really, really important about why they're using the buses and what other choices are sensible, because that's the basis on which you tend to be able to influence behaviour. You very specifically mentioned, and we're very lucky to have Naomi here to talk about the EEH work, but in terms of the local growth plan, there was a meeting last week with I think the group's called the UK Mayors, and they are very actively talking with government about the local growth plans. The first intention is that by the end, I believe, of August, there will be a 5-page summary of what would be included in that, and that would include, for instance, the vision, which would be obviously aligned to the shared ambition work, but it would also include transport and connectivity, the infrastructure that we need to enable jobs, learning and homes, but also a very strong theme around net zero, including retrofitting homes. So it's a broad, and I'm sure there's things I've forgotten in there, including digital connectivity, but there's a breadth of things that would be in there. In terms of the further work, so if that was submitted in late August, clearly what we need to understand is how does that develop? Where does it go forward? How does it then connect with accessing money with the comprehensive spending review, and those kind of things? And as I understand it, the UK Mayor's Group is working with government to kind of work through some of those questions. And clearly there might be some negotiations about timelines and content, but we'll be looking to hit that end of end of August deadline, and then work through with that. And obviously that will need to be brought in a timely fashion to the relevant committees.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments on this one? Well, as ever, and at the risk of sounding like a stuck record, there is a huge amount in the director's report that potentially none of us even ask questions on. And I'm not encouraging us to ask questions on every single line. We will be here until midnight, but there is so much that is captured in that. And there's also a lot that's captured that isn't even captured in that report, because there is too much being done by our transport team at the moment to be able to put into that report. They really are working exceptionally hard. And as ever, I want to thank them for their work and for their forbearance with us, and the comments and questions that we have. It's hugely appreciated, and we are doing some really, really superb work here, and I want to thank all of the teams for that. So thank you. And now I need to find my piece of paper again. So we are now going on to item 7, which is the bus service improvement plan. I just want to alert people, we have 2 bus service items on this agenda. We have item 7 and item 8 on the bus reform outlay business case. So 2 things. Firstly, these are separate items. So I do want us to keep our discussions from kind of flowing one into the other. I think that would be really helpful. The other thing is, because the second item, item 8, which is the bus reform outlay business case, does include exempt items, and there is therefore a possibility that we may need to move into exempt session for that. I will be moving, I believe I have to suggest this and there's a vote. Is that right? Or can I just write? So I am going to propose that we move this to the end of the agenda, so that if we need to go into exempt session, we can simply close the live stream down and exclude people, and we haven't got our officers standing around outside waiting to come back in. I think it's much neater that way and allows that discussion. So if I make that proposal, may I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor MacDonald. Right, so can I see votes in favour of shifting that? Thank you, that's all voting members. Okay, so we will move item 8 to the end of the agenda, but now we're on to item 7, which is the bus service improvement plan. Judith Barker, the Executive Director for Place and Connectivity, will introduce the report. Judith, you again.
Yes, thank you. And we are also joined today online by Mike Holmes, who works for WSP, who have been contracted by CPCA to support us in the production of the business bus services improvement plan. So any technical questions, then hopefully either Mike or I will be able to take those. So obviously in your pack, you have a cover paper about BSIP, and then you have the BSIP document. What I can confirm is that document was submitted to government on the 12th of June as required, and the March board delegated authority to me to work with the chair to make sure that document was submitted in a timely fashion. And as a result of achieving that, the BSIP funds for 2024-25 were released to us. So you can see within the document that it's set out in 6 sections. One of the issues that was noted in previous discussions last year and before was that perhaps the document hadn't been seen to have sufficient ambition. And so one of the things that we were very clear on working with both Mike and colleagues in our constituent authorities, who all officers across our constituent authorities were all given the opportunity to talk in detail about this with us. We were really trying to drive forward that ambition to make sure that both the improvement plan works for this year but particularly the proposals and ambitions for 25 to 35 really reflected that. So obviously happy to take any questions on the detail. Mike is here to help me with any of those detailed questions, as my colleague Andrew Highfield is on leave, but happy to hand back to you and see what questions our committee have today.
And I think it's probably worth emphasising, isn't it, just for clarification for people, that we had to shift a lot of timings of committees around because of the election. And that has meant that officers potentially had already had things they couldn't move. And I'm sure none of us would expect an officer to come back from leave to attend a committee. But I just want to be clear that in case anyone was wondering that. So I would like any questions or comments. Councillor Jamil. I mean, Councillor Shane always says, "Oh, go on then," kind of face. Right, Councillor Jamil.
Thank you, Chair. I'm new to this, and I'm sure lots of work has gone into getting this plan to this stage. Now, one of my constituents who asked a question earlier has also asked me to ask a question regarding what consultation took place with disability groups with regards to ease of use of buses. Now, he's already referred to the buses that we use in Peterborough. Now, if no consultation has taken place with disability groups, what are we going to do to rectify that so they are included, as they are just as important as everybody else? So if you could answer that for me, please.
We have Councillor Shaler next. Councillor Shaler.
Thank you very much, Chair. Again, I very much applaud this. This is the beginning. And what we are looking for, of course, is connectivity and the way it's joined up. And even if buses are not going to be the end, once you have a passenger transport network, you can then add in other bits and pieces and use trams or whatever else you want to do. The important distinction of a passenger transport network is that every improvement that we make, every link that we make in that, it increases the viability of the whole network. This is almost opposite to what happens when you build a new road. When you build a new road, it creates more traffic and actually reduces the viability of the rest of the network. So this is something to keep in mind. And with this in mind, I want to especially applaud the new services that take passengers to train stations. And we have a way to go there, and that this is something about the next item as well. But thank you very much.
Any other questions? And I'm also looking up at the screen here to make sure I don't miss Chris. Okay, Judith, over to you.
Thank you. So the first question regarding the consultation, which is also always a critical part of the development of a new strategy. This document was requested by DfT. I can't quite remember the day, but it was in the middle of March. And we were required to produce this by, as I say, for submission on the 12th of June. So we didn't do a consultation beyond speaking to all of the transport teams and more widely in economic development teams and so on, in all of our constituent authorities, because the timeline to develop it didn't allow for that. However, the local transport and connectivity plan obviously was subject to that consultation, and accessibility is clearly a key theme of the LTCP. Moving into the period from 2025 to 2030, then clearly we do need to consider how we can move forward on the accessibility agenda. Indeed, I know part of my colleague Tim Bellamy's role as the AD for Transport is to consider how we are considering accessibility for all groups, both physical disability and non-visible disabilities are incorporated into our emerging transport projects, but also our wider strategic role. So I think that probably sort of covers off from unless Tim wants to add anything to that. But also in terms of the point that Councillor Shayler was making, I think there's two really important things about how we go forward in terms of the BSIP delivery, particularly in that 25 to 30 period. It's both the what we do, but also how we do it, and thinking really carefully about that sort of engagement piece, the communications, the accessibility, the provision of information, and working with our constituent local authorities and local parish and community groups to do that even better. So I think that's absolutely part of the how, and we need to continue to strengthen how we can do that.
Thank you. So just as a follow-up, presumably there was quite extensive consultation for the LTCP, of which this is a child document. Is that correct? Tim, you're nodding. I don't know if you want to come in on that.
Yes, I'm happy to take that. So yes, as part of the consultation of the LTCP, we engaged with over 100 groups across the region, and they did include disability groups within that. The other thing I was going to add is I'm in constant, regular contact with Clive Gilbert, who's the National Centre for Accessible Transport. So we're working through exactly what Judy said earlier. Is I'm working through how we can then look at perceived but also actual disability issues as we go forward, and how they are impacted on our projects, and that fed into our design and into our design form as well.
Thank you for that. I also welcome at paragraph 4.13.5 where you've included wheelchair accessibility standard, and you've written in that you ensure that bus fleet maintains a standard of being low floor and wheelchair accessible, equipped onboard wheelchair ramps. So it's a start, and I'm glad that that's been included in there because I think it's important, and I will relay that back to my constituent. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll make sure that we have really clearly on record this committee's commitment to ensuring that transport is accessible, and that we're including all groups in our work on that. So thank you. I think that's a really important question to raise. Are there any more questions or comments on this item? Councillor Sharp.
Yeah, we're there. Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, obviously this is a sort of required to get funding from DFT. The extra, was it 2.4 million or whatever it is? Got a couple of comments, and obviously looking at part of it, we've got and as I touched on in a previous question, the proposed extra, additional routes that are going to come out. I've had one comment come back to me about difficulties booking the Ting service in terms of an app. I'll happily share an email to you if you can look at that, because certainly one young person was struggling to get, or they were being cancelled and were being told that, but that's a more individual issue. But it's also touching on, I know the combined authorities looking at demand responsive transport over in the east as well, into East Cambridgeshire. So it'd be useful to get updates on that. But yes, there's a lot in here, but it sort of leads to further questions, which hopefully will come out maybe in the next or the last item we're looking at today, and going forward with details of the extra services and how it's going to expand bus usage, really. Yeah. Thank you. There's more of a statement than a comment than a question, really. Sorry.
Is there anything else on this one? Otherwise, I'll pass on to Judith for final comments on that. Judith?
Thank you. If you can send me those specific details, very happy to help with that. Regarding the Ting service, you're quite right that I can't remember if it's 3 or 4, but several local area Ting services are part of the precept contracts, which we are now going out to procurement. We are looking at a new system. So previously we purchased the app with the bus services, and we're looking at us holding the electronic service. Then we can contract the buses separately, or the transport separately. So we're looking at different methods. But my understanding is that although they won't be in the first batch of precept routes that come forward, we certainly will be looking at having those in place towards the sort of late autumn. But again, we can provide you with a further update in September, and I'll follow up on that particular query you've had.
Thank you. And I do want to particularly give thanks to the officers who were involved in this, because my understanding is we didn't get a lot of notice from the Department for Transport to get this together. So they had to move extremely quickly. Very grateful to those. I think Mike, who is joining us on screen, was the one that did a lot of the legwork on this. So Mike, particularly, thank you to you for that. So I'm just looking here. We do actually have a vote on this one. So I propose that we take both recommendations together and just take one vote. If anyone disagrees, could you raise your hand? Okay, so we're going to take both together. There are 2 recommendations, which I will read to ensure they're on the audio record. So recommendation A, to recommend to the Combined Authority Board that it approves the revised bus service improvement plan as prepared by the Combined Authority at the instruction of the Department for Transport. And B, to recommend to the Combined Authority Board that, subject to approval of the bus service improvement plan, this be published on the Combined Authority website and a final version to be submitted to the Department for Transport. This is one of those votes that will need at least 2/3 of the members present, including the county and Peterborough members. So I will propose this. Who would like to second? Councillor Jamil, thank you. It's like worried there for a moment. Can I see all those in favour, please? Thank you. That's all voting members in favour. Thank you. Now, we do have a request for another shift on agenda on the basis that our EEH report, I know that our speakers on that are coming in, and I think coming in from abroad as well. And so we would like to ensure that you're not sitting around too long. So my proposal would be that we bring item number, I'm afraid the numbering has gone on my list here. What number is that? Sorry, it's not on my list. Pardon? Item number 11, England's Economic Heartlands Connecting Economies Investment Brochure. I'm proposing that we bring that up the agenda. Do I have a seconder for that proposal? Councillor Jamil, thank you. Can I see those in favour of bringing that up the agenda, please? That's everyone able to vote in favour? Thank you. Okay, let me just find... Okay, so this report is to be presented by Naomi Green, Managing Director of England's Economic Heartland. She's presenting virtually. Naomi, please take the floor.
If board members are comfortable, we've prepared a 4-slide deck, which just to introduce and frame the brochures, and then we'd like to use kind of get your feedback on them. They were included as part of the agenda pack circulated by the Combined Authority officers. So the actual investment brochure is in front of you, but we have got a very short deck to share with you as well about kind of why we have produced them. And just to introduce my colleague Adam King, who's joined me on the call, who is the author of the brochures and done a huge amount of work in producing them. So I think any specific questions, it's fantastic to have him here as well. Adam, if I could just move forward. by the combined authority. But when you go beyond that into some of the smaller local authorities, bus routes should not be constrained by the boundaries. We've got a really good example where Hertfordshire got a huge amount. But actually, when you hit the border of Buckinghamshire, there was no funding for BSIPs on the Buckinghamshire border. So the level of service on buses where you cross those local authority boundaries can be very, very varied. And that's an example of where actually a subnational transport body working across these boundaries can really add value. It's slightly different with the combined authority, but we work really hard to get that right balance of particularly what we can learn from the ambitions of the combined authority to translate through the need for stronger integration of investment by the government and its agencies so that can be much better aligned with local combined authority investments and infrastructure providers. Really good example there is the A1 and making sure that where national highways are thinking about the A1, particularly also encouraging and pushing our advocacy over investment in the A1, but making sure that's aligned with what local authority partners actually want. One of the really identifying the region's priorities for investment and actually moving those particular investments and priorities through to putting them on the government's radar, on MPs' radars, and actually moving them through to securing funding for them. So the basis of this conversation is particularly focusing on that latter bullet where we really want to identify where our region's strategic priorities are and focusing on sort of chunks of the region in more granular detail to do that. Thank you, Adam. I mean, none of this will be a surprise to you, particularly given the focus that you have within the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough region around the economic contribution that your area provides to the UK economy. As a region, we have a very high level of economic growth, very significant contribution to the Treasury, but more than that, as Andy Williams said earlier, a really significant opportunity to drive some of our big sectors forward. 25% of all life science jobs are in the region, and there is a very big cluster, as you well know, around Cambridge. This map shows the spread of life sciences jobs around the region, and actually one of the things that we're working on at the moment is how we can really draw out where there are major clusters, of which of course Cambridgeshire and Peterborough is very dominant, but what it does also show is that it's not the relationship between life sciences it extends beyond the boundaries of Cambridge and Peterborough. And as Andy Williams you will well know from talking to him in the work of the Science Supercluster, that relationship with Stevenage going through to obviously Oxfordshire, but also other parts of the region you can see here through the dots, shows the need for connectivity across our geography. As a region, we do have some really significant issues that largely are not helped by lack of investment in infrastructure to the level that we need to match our growth opportunity. First of all, productivity. 20 years ago, productivity in this region was above the national average. It's now 3% below it. While, of course, some of that is to do with kind of balancing out with the high performance of London, that shouldn't be something that we should just accept. And absolutely one of the things that we've been working on is where infrastructure is a major barrier to productivity and where we have connectivity gaps in our region as a result of poor infrastructure investment. Overall, carbon emissions from transport are higher than the national average, 6% higher for carbon emissions from transport. That's really significant given the region that we operate in, and actually the expectation of many businesses that are based here, that we do have a strong green agenda. And so there's a bit of a conflict there, and a lot of that is about the fact that many parts of our region people travel further than the national average, but also they don't have an alternative choice but to a car. Finally, there are actually significant pockets of deprivation and inequality in the region. some of those are in places like Northamptonshire, Fenland, which you will well know, very high levels of rural population, and actually the transport solutions in those areas are very different from a metro. You're thinking about different transport solutions and how you invest in them. So that representation is really important as well. Just going on to the next slide, if I can, Adam. Oh, sorry, there's two more, but I'm going to, if I just move over to the next one, just to give you an example of some of the advocacy work that we do. This was the Ely Junction advocacy activity where we published a brochure in the middle of last year, and that has a lot of kind of dynamic information in it. It's quite interesting to look at. And as a result of that, we've obviously shared it with MPs, with local partners, private sector. And as a result of that, actually, we secured the government commitment to Ely to invest in Ely as part of the Network North announcements last October. It's absolutely the case. We need to keep investing in that, promoting and advocating for that scheme. But actually, what we did learn is that this brochure type approach really works. So what we've done is, just going on to the next slide, Adam, is learned from that and produced brochures for the rest of the region. There are two that are relevant to the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough geography. One is the Peterborough, Northampton, Oxford brochure, and the second is the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough brochure. The actual brochures are in the documents that in your papers for the meeting. And what by presenting this to you, this is a chance for you to give us a bit of feedback on the brochures and any thoughts or comments you have on them. I particularly mentioned the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough brochure, which was, rather than us starting from scratch on an evidence base, we've created that using a kind of intentional collation of all the evidence and needs that the region, that the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough area already have, and therefore we welcome feedback on whether the right schemes are included in those brochures. We've done a huge amount of kind of work with your officers to capture their views on them. But this is if there's anything in there that you would like more information on, then please do raise that with us now. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. And I'm just going to clarify. Right. So my understanding is the final timescale on this brochure is September. So what I'm going to do is give some time for discussion today. If this looks like it's going to become a significantly longer discussion item, then we may want to find some other mechanism as well of getting all the committee's views back to you in detail. So let's see how it goes. So who do we have that wishes to speak or comment on this item? Andy? Anyone else? Andy, over to you.
And so with due respect to Naomi, the thought of a subnational regional transport body does not always turn on industry, but you save the day by generating a really powerful and strong brochure, to be honest. And I think what I talked about earlier, this link between transport and economy is really important, and you make it absolutely brilliantly in this document. So we were all asked to provide feedback, so perhaps that's one of the reasons we haven't got so much feedback now. I gave some quite technical, complex feedback, I think probably to Adam, and I have to say the way he responded to that reassured me greatly that it wasn't just a process of collating numbers and putting them in there, but it's a truly interactive document which reflects reality rather than taking numbers which just get spouted out at the end. So I have a lot of confidence in this document, and I'd encourage those who haven't had a chance to look at it fully to do so. One minor point that I did see, which I hadn't seen before, was a potentially improved link between Peterborough and Cambridge, which I think was probably thrown in at the end as an interesting new concept. So I've talked before, and about linking economic geography with transport is really, really important to make sure that we reflect our functional geography, our functional economy. But there's also an opportunity to rechange your functional economy as well. I haven't seen the narrative about why joining Peterborough up to Cambridge would change that economic geography, but it's definitely a possibility. There's a lot of good sectors in Peterborough, which are not a million miles away in medtech terms from the life science sector in Cambridge. So it's probably not one for the short term, but starting to build a narrative about what combining Peterborough to Cambridge in a fast sustainable transport link might do is an interesting idea, because it starts to look at new paradigms of economic growth rather than just reinforcing where the current economic growth is. So a strong document, very much support it, recommend it. I'll be recommending it for the business board. For a long time, the business board have been, not struggling, but thinking about how do we demonstrate the actual economic benefit of some of the transport schemes to deliver. And I think this document starts to do that.
Thank you. And yes, I should underline that this is not the first time that the committee, yep, thank you, I'll take you in a sec, Tom. Sorry, Councillor Sanderson. This is not the first time that this committee has seen this in terms of our representative authorities. I know there's been a lot of dialogue and discussion at both officer and member level around this. And I would personally want to underline absolutely what Andy's just said about the quality of this document. And it's fantastic to see so many of our strategic priorities as a Cambridgeshire and Peterborough area coming through into this. So lots of the things that we've been talking about, whether that's improved links between Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, the Lincoln Road bus depot, Alconbury Road station, there's so much in here. So thank you for the work that you're doing. And Councillor Sanderson, question from yourself as well. And then Naomi, if you haven't spotted, what I tend to do is take questions in chunks and then give you the chance to respond. So I haven't missed you out in response here. Tom.
Thank you, Chair. I know there've been a lot of technical discussions between relevant officers from Hunts District Council and from here. And some of the brochure does reflect District Council's understanding of local challenges and some other elements. But I just wanted to clarify, have all those been picked up in this document? Are the two authorities happy now, basically?
Thank you. Possibly it might be good just to take that from our perspective first and then pass on to Naomi.
So from our perspective, I've spoken to officers at 8DC, where they're happy with the comments that have been taken on board. There was a question, a bigger question about the alignment with the brochures and what we took UK Reef as well. So making sure there's that final alignment. So we are doing that final work with Naomi to make sure that they are strongly aligned. But the other comments have been taken on board that was offered by you.
Okay, Naomi.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your very kind comments about the brochures. Just in terms of Councillor Sanderson's question, I absolutely think we have taken on as many of the comments as we can, and we work really closely with your officers. I think the nature of this, because it was an intentional collation of evidence rather than us starting from scratch, which was the quickest and most efficient way of doing it, that's where actually we needed to go through that technical work with officers from all the different district councils and county. I think we've done that. Working with Tim, we'll make sure that the combined authority are content. And actually, I'm due to see the Chief Exec of Huntingdonshire next week anyway, so I will make sure that she's comfortable with the way we've taken this forward as well.
Thank you. And I think there is probably an ongoing learning point for all of us as well, in that I know that there were I think there's been so much really excellent technical work. I think we need to think about how we ensure that we get members involved at all the stages as well there, Naomi, so that obviously if there are things that those of us who are representatives on the EEH board can do to facilitate that at an earlier stage, I think it'll be very useful for us to have that conversation, because we want to ensure that not only is there the technical work, but there's that member-led strategic input as well into this. So it might be worth us having kind of 15, 20 minutes on that to see how we can improve that, and possibly bringing Hunts into that conversation as well. Thank you. Well, if there are no more questions or comments on that item, Tom.
Just have another one. The page with the rail network map, that seems to show an interchange between East West Rail and East Coast Main Line. Is that what we'll be advocating for under this document?
Adam, would you like to? Can I bring Adam in for the specifics of that one, if that's okay? Thank you, Chair.
Tempsford. That would be where the station, the proposed station at Tempsford would be. So that's why it's on the map.
Thank you. And it sounds then as if, so this links back a little bit or quite strongly to our public question from earlier. So I think we need to ensure that everybody is joined up as we continue to have those conversations around how places like St Neots are properly linked in to these railway stations and connectivity to make sure that all these documents continue to reflect each other effectively. So officers, if I can leave you to make sure that happens, that would be really helpful. Okay, if there are no more questions or comments, then Adam and Naomi, thank you so much for joining us. It's really helpful. And yeah, I think I would certainly commend to anybody who is watching to take a look through that investment brochure. I think it's a really fascinating, a very well presented document as well in terms of making this data very accessible and helpful. So thank you very much. Right, now I'm going to need to just take a look at where we've now got back to in the agenda. So just bear with me a second. We are now moving, I believe, on to, and I think this is agenda item 9, is this correct? The A141 and St Ives improvement study. This is an update on progress and engagement. And Tim Greenwood will be giving us an update. Says Greenwood on here. Tim Bellamy will be giving us an update on progress and engagement. Tim, over to you.
I'll take you through where we are with regard to the A141 in Matthew Lutz Adperton. So just with regard the progress to date. So the point of this paper is to give you an outline on where we are in the A141 and St Ives improvement study. This is focused on upgrading the transport network in the A141 corridor, Huntingdon and St Ives. And the study aims to support local and long distance travel through various improvements. The project strongly aligns with our LTCP and also Huntingdonshire District Council's local plan, with the objective to reduce congestion, improve reliability in the study area, facilitate sustainable growth and improve public realm, enhance connectivity through active travel mode, and improve bus service provision and interchange. Within the paper itself, it outlines the 3 options that are being assessed. So you've got the refined hybrid package, and then the variant to that, and then the low-cost option. We have been engaging with members of the Huntingdon District Council, so we've had a workshop with them, and also continue to engage with officers and have a member working group taking this forward. The plan for public engagement will happen sometime in autumn of this year, and regular updates will be provided to the committee on the material for that, and with the effective communication of the output from that engagement. So that was a very quick update with regard to the A141. The information in the paper, but also myself and David can answer any questions.
Thank you. And I should also thank Hunts District Council for inviting myself along to their briefing session with Cabinet. That was very helpful and useful to be able to be part of that. And I'm obviously happy to come and sit in on any other briefing sessions. Suspecting I'm making a rod for my own back here. I might regret this, but I'm more than happy to be invited to other similar sessions across the region. Questions or comments on this item, please? Neil? Councillor Shaler.
It's gone off again. Yeah, I want to thank the people who have contributed to the working group. And it's one of those projects that we took on early in the life of this combined authority. And it wasn't fit for purpose when we took over it. And it has really changed and morphed into something very much in line with what we're trying to achieve in connectivity and make use of the resources that we have. So I think it's really moving in a good direction. Thank you very much, Chair.
Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Just to really echo Councillor Shaler, I think the paper actually looks a lot better because of the extra work and preparation. So pleased that we've taken this step forward and present this as part of our local growth plan as the Deputy Prime Minister recently launched. So I very much welcome it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on this one? And again, I know a huge amount of work has gone into this, and I'm very grateful as chair for that work. And I want to reflect the thanks of everyone on the committee to those who have been involved. We've been asked to note this report, which we have done. There is no voting required, so we're able to move on to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 10. Hope you're all keeping up. This is the active travel plan, and Jo Higden, our active travel lead, will introduce the report. And I believe we also have Anna Graham here as well, should we need to call on her. But Jo, over to you, please.
Okay, is that on? Yeah, great. Thank you. So I'm here today to share the Combined Authorities outline approach for active travel for this financial year. There are a number of recommendations in the active travel plan paper. We asked the committee to note the 5 active travel strategic aims in lieu of an active travel strategy. These will be used to guide our work over the next year. We'd also like to recommend that the committee approve the request for the redistribution of the medium-term financial plan transport revenue funding from historic dormant schemes outlined in Appendix D to active travel projects, which will include the e-cargo bike try before you buy scheme. If this recommendation is approved, we'd also like to use this funding to create a community active travel grant where community groups can bid for funds to improve walking, wheeling and cycling in their local area. And we're also asking for approval to create this grant. Furthermore, the Combined Authority have successfully received funding from Active Travel England of £1.1 million. This is from the Active Travel Fund 4 extension bid, and we request that this money be drawn down. We would also request that the committee approve the delegation of authority to the Assistant Director in order for a grant funding agreements to be put in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments on this report, please? Andy, Tom. Right, start with you two, please.
That's okay. So it's good to see behavioural change as something we're trying to fund. It's something you feel like a mantra saying some point at the meeting. So we talk about bus reform, bus service improvement plan, but without that behavioural change, another change, none of it's going to happen. So it's really important we do that. And just to show that I'm not completely on message, I do worry about section 2.4 projects that we're no longer going to progress. Always makes my heart sink a little bit. So I know the Harston capacity study was something much loved by the Harston community and wanted to see. Now I know about that one, and therefore I'm assuming the other 3 schemes are all equally loved by whoever first proposed them. So a little bit of information on why those went down. So supportive of the behavioural changes, I'm sure it's somewhere in the document. But whenever you lose a scheme, there's obviously somebody who's not got their scheme as a consequence of that. So it's a little bit of a worry.
Tom?
Chair, well, I probably have to admit I was some ways pleased to read 2.4 because it does actually mean that something in my own area, a couple of projects here actually from Alconbury to the Stooklys to Huntingdon will be funded, and linking up to employment centres and to the railway station. But I think as Andy said, it's good to see this sort of spread of projects. Talking about buses earlier, I know a lot of active travel's concentrated in urban areas, but it's good to see some of the rural areas getting funding here. So I do welcome that. Thank you.
Councillor Shaler, Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. I was really happy to see that on the strategic objectives, the very first one was increased connectivity. And we need to see these things as connected. It's not in isolation. I always say that every bus stop is an active transport hub, and it's the way that these feed together and make the whole network work. On county, we're looking at missing links on active transport routes. If we can add to networks together. It's like a gestalt. It's more than the sum of the parts, and that's what we're looking at here. So thank you very much for this paper.
Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. Just one real question and a comment. Notice we've got the looking at allocation, although it says 23-24, allocation of 150,000 on the A142 Chatteris to Snailwell. I mean, that's a long stretch of road. Certainly within East Cams, we had a bus cycling walking group, which I chaired, and we've just stood it down after 5 years because we've basically got loads of oven-ready schemes with no funding. But we certainly did some work along parts of that route. So I'd be interested, not for now, but to understand some detail behind what that funding, what that study is trying to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Sharp, can I just confirm that presumably that list of schemes, that kind of hopper, if you like, is something that we've also got as part of the Combined Authority team, so we're able to see that?
Yeah, I presume they've been, I will check where they've been shared. Yeah, I'll check with Tim. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, do you want to, and I think particularly important actually, if you can talk us through the reasons for removing the funding from those items on 2.4, I think that will be very, very helpful.
Yeah, thank you. So the senior management team has gone through all of the I can't think of the medium-term financial plan and the schemes on there, and these ones were deemed to it was during a Moscow process where you say whether it's needed now, essential or not. Sorry, Judith, do you want to? Yeah, if they're happy to, that's fine. Thanks.
Yes, so as Yo was quite rightly saying, earlier on this year, and I can't quite remember the time frame for it, we had in this room a very thorough review of all of the projects that we've got going, and in order to frame the directorate business plans for this year, we did what's called a Moscow process, which is the kind of must, should, could, won't exercise for anybody that was wondering. And we went through that, and there's clearly some projects that are not likely to move forward in the window of the medium-term financial plan. And there are other, so there's some that are going to take some time. There's also a number of kind of prioritizations of those things that make the greatest impact. And so we had really looked at that in order to build up the directorate business plan with colleagues from across the organisation. And so that exercise is what there was a greater focus on active travel and a lesser focus on those projects that were really going to take some time to move forward. Now, of course, what we have coming up, and in fact, the meeting I was in this morning was planning for the medium-term financial plan for this coming year. So there's going to be a process working through how the budget for 25, 26 and beyond is worked through. Clearly, if there are things that we have considered in that process that we need to reconsider, we've got scope to do that, but that is the process that we went through as a senior management team to kind of consider some of the issues, and it's around that these proposals were brought forward. And then obviously Yo's work is very much about delivering the active travel agenda.
So I certainly wouldn't question the judgment of the senior leadership team in making that prioritisation. I just, knowing the scheme I know about, and I'm sure it's true for the other three, Harson capacity study at the time was quite emotive. They really wanted it done. Do we have a mechanism of feeding back to the people who propose these projects to ensure they know it's they never know, and then they found out it was taken by a decision 9 months ago, and it just doesn't help. So I think somehow feeding back to those who haven't been supported and tell them how they're going to get that support in the future would be really useful. And I'm sure it applies to all the schemes. Saying every scheme is loved by the person who put it forward.
Actually, can I, just to add to that, the way that I read this and from what you're saying there is that the recommendation is not that these schemes are kind of binned never to return, but that they are not going to be top of the priority list for this year. So I think that's really important to emphasise. And placing firmly my Cambridge City representative hat on for a second, in my own ward is a scheme, it was a county scheme, I hasten to add, but there was a scheme which was consulted on several years ago and has still not been completed. And I know that it is one of the biggest questions I consistently get is, well, what about the rest of Cherry Hinton Road? And I think it's really important that we are able to capture strategic schemes that are important to local residents. And also if they do develop views that are beyond just the we can't afford that right now, but become more about this doesn't work and here's why. I think we need to be able to have really open conversations with residents about that. I'm not saying that's the case here, but I think it's worth noting that rather than just leaving things in abeyance. Right, is there anything? Neil, Councillor Shaler.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to quickly come back on that one, I think what people quite often like to see is what is in the hopper. You know, what are the schemes that are close or are looking for funding or that have had some analysis put into them. And so, because quite often these things, you know, if you're not poring over every single word, they seem to come from nowhere. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, I think there's two really important points here. There's one that's about communications and about people knowing where they stand and what they've talked about before and where is it now and understanding that narrative. So I think there's a really important kind of communications point that we're discussing here. And then I think there's another point which is about sort of pipeline development and having robust projects going forward. And we spoke earlier about the infrastructure delivery framework, and that's obviously about very large scale projects. And there's kind of a need to have those kind of big pipeline projects that are really going to make a fundamental difference across the whole region. But there's also lots of other things that make a significant difference and are really important. And thinking about how we handle that pipeline, I think is going to be really important because we need a blend of both things. And we need to think about how we're doing that going forward, both from a transport and connectivity point of view, but also more widely in terms of the local growth plan work. So there is work going on thinking about if we have this local growth plan, we've got to have conversations about how we're going to best deliver it and how we're going to have the big projects and also the small projects. And that's probably going to drive a relook at what we're doing again going into the next financial year. So absolutely, I think both the communications and the pipeline development are really live issues which we need to consider. And so I take that very seriously and thank you.
Thank you. And I think we probably all welcome some conversations around that hopper because clearly our discussion earlier on the BSIP showed that sometimes requests can come very quickly for information, and having a hopper that we have all agreed on, both for the big strategic projects, but also for the projects that in the bigger picture cost more money, cost much less money, but are still significant projects that a local community would be unlikely to be able to fund themselves. If we have a really clear hopper in place, I think that's going to help us all enormously. So that would be very welcome. Thank you. Other questions or comments on this item? And speaking as someone who has quite a few friends who are really keen to go with cargo bikes particularly, I assume we'd include children, carrying children on those kind of bikes, but aren't able to propel that bike. I think an e-cargo bike scheme would be hugely welcomed by a lot of people. I think that would be, I'm very keen to see how that progresses. Is there anything else on that one? Now this, we have a lot of things to vote on. Do I need to read out all the recommendations? Right, I am going to suggest that if anybody wishes to see the recommendations, they take a look at the start of agenda item 10, which is page 151 on your pack, because there are quite a few of them. But we need to vote on recommendations B, C, E, and F. Is everyone happy to vote on those en masse? So I will propose Who would like to second? Councillor MacDonald. So can I see those in favour of the active travel plan? That's all voting members present. Yo, thank you very much to you for all the work that's gone into this. Thank you. We're now going on to item number 12. Item 12 is the March area transport study. And thank you, Councillor Seaton, because I know that you're unwell, but you've managed to stay in this long to be able to contribute if needed to this item. So this is a paper that was brought to the last committee, but because at that point it did not receive support, we are bringing it back to this one. The package of schemes included for delivery within the MATs requires our approval as soon as possible to ensure its timely and effective implementation. Now, Tim Bellamy is going to introduce the report. We did last time say that we would bring only kind of new comments to this rather than go back over comments that were made last time. But I do particularly want to give Councillor Seaton the chance to contribute because he was not at that meeting. But Tim, do you want to please introduce that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I will keep this relatively brief because it did come in June. So this is an update regarding the March area transport strategy, and the purpose is to seek approval to draw down £7 million from the medium-term financial plan. And it's our expectation that the work will be completed over the course of two financial years. There was an independent review on the full business case, and it found that there was a very high value for money, medium level of uncertainty with the funding restraint, and the initial focus should be on the 20-foot road and St Peter's Road. The economic case looked for the whole of the package. This will be to deliver £7 million of the bigger package, and as I say, we prioritise those two schemes because they are deliverable and we can meet those with the £7 million. The summary is the approval is sought for £7 million for MATs. We initially focus on the improvement due to the funding constraint outlined. We'll be able to deliver the whole of the package, and this is focused on supporting growth in March to align to Fenland's local plan. And ultimately, I'm here to take any questions as and when necessary.
Okay, so I'm going to start by going directly to Councillor Seaton. Councillor Seaton, you have the floor. Thank you. Any more comments? Councillor Shaler.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to Councillor Seaton. I think, Chair, that Councillor Seaton has been involved with this for a lot longer than we've been around. I believe that he was on the March Future High Street Steering Group and several others as well. And I want to reiterate that we have been supporting this all the way through from the combined authority, including quite a lot of money. And it kind of goes against Councillor Seaton's contention that we don't spend money in the rural areas, that along with the Ralph Butcher Causeway and this one, which is likely eventually to top 30 million or so. This is significant investment into our rural, and in this case, both of them into Finland, which I think we're quite proud of doing, in fact. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, so with some slight trepidation, I propose that we move to the vote. Councillor Seaton has a hand up again. Sorry, Councillor Seaton.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back on Councillor Shayler's comment there. I don't recall ever saying that not enough money had been spent in Fendon. I'm sure that's probably everyone's point of view, that there's never enough money spent in their areas, wherever they may be. So I just thought I'd make that point. Thank you, Chair.
Right. I propose that we move to the vote. Do I have I don't think Councillor Seaton can second that, can he? Because he's not in the room. So who would like to second that we move to the vote on this? Councillor Shayler will second. So can I see those in favour of the report's recommendations? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Now we will just move forward. There's one more substantive item left, but we'll just cover off all the other items beforehand, just to be on the safe side. I expect after all this, we won't end up having to go into exempt session at all, but I just want to be sure. So item 13 is the Transport and Infrastructure Committee work programme. So we're just really noting the agenda plan. Are there any questions or comments on that agenda plan, please? And again, and I'm not sure as a former teacher, I'm going to quite forgive our director for talking about the school holidays being over before they've barely started, but we do have to look up to September for the date of the next meeting. It is currently scheduled for Wednesday, the 18th of September. Do we have a venue at the moment for that? Okay, so currently scheduled for Pathfinder House, but that is still to be decided. So please give sufficient time, committee, around your other commitments to ensure travel to wherever we need to get to. I'm beginning to think we should think of some creative ways to travel to our meetings, to try out the variety of options available to us as a transport team. Perhaps Yo should work with us on that one. Okay, so we are now going to move on. This does stay in public session for now, but it allows us to go into exempt session should we need to. We are now going to move back up the agenda to item 8. This is the bus reform outline business case, and Judith Barker will again introduce this report. Judith. Oh.
Sorry, Chair. I think you did the right thing, by the way, moving it to the end, but unfortunately I've got a 3 o'clock appointment and I'm going to have to leave you, and best wishes. It's a good paper.
Thank you, Councillor. We are still quorate, aren't we? Thank you. Thank you for letting us know. Judith.
Thank you, Chair. Many of you in this room may have previously seen a slide deck that we have provided in order to inform you of the progress of the development of the bus reform work. I don't intend today to do a slide deck, but obviously both myself and Rob Emery, who's just joined the table as the Assistant Director of Finance, are very happy to take detailed questions and indeed show the slide deck if that is helpful. We are very aware that we have sent to you a wide-ranging and considerable volume of information. So we are both here to attempt to answer any of those questions. And if we can't answer today, we will certainly endeavour to come back to you with all haste. So I was planning, Chair, if that's okay with you, to do a very brief introduction and then take any questions from the committee. So obviously you'll be aware from the paper that there are 4 recommendations. 1, to recommend to the board to approve the bus reform assessment, also known as the business case, which was dated as the 1st of July, and obviously to recommend that to the board. The second part of A is to note that we had it's important to note that previously the board had approved an earlier version of the business case, which came in September. So I think the important thing to recognise in that improving the bus reform assessment or business case from July is actually superseding that earlier approval in September. So the second recommendation is to recommend to the board that we should formally begin public consultation and give all the necessary notices, etc., that we are required to do. The third is to recommend to the board to note the draft audit letter from Grant Thornton that we sent out in the pack. And that audit letter has also been accompanied in the pack with our response to that audit letter. And the fourth recommendation is to delegate to myself, indeed working with colleagues at the Combined Authority, to formally accept that final audit letter and publish the assessment. We can't get the final audit letter until the assessment and business case is actually formally adopted by the board. So there's that just extra stage that we've built in. So I just wanted to say a few words of introduction, just to say clearly at present, we have a deregulated bus market. So we heard earlier that 88% of the bus services in this area are run by the private sector. And as we've seen, that does create some challenges. The service isn't as integrated as it could be. We're not able to cross-subsidise from one service to another because those services are run within the private sector. So we have a choice that's presented by the Bus Services Act 2017, where we can look at other options. We can look at an enhanced partnership or the franchising model. And the assessment, the 360-page assessment that's in front of you, does that comparison of looking at franchising and an enhanced partnership in particular detail in a medium investment scenario. And it looks at 4 particular objectives. It looks at what our aim in the bus strategy is to improve the bus network, have improved connectivity through the bus network. It's also to consider, are we providing through the bus network, allowing greater impact to be delivered through social, economic and environmental impact. It's also looking at the experience of bus users. Are they getting a more integrated service that allows them to, for instance, to have integrated ticketing, get to where they want to be? And finally, the test of the objectives is, does it offer value for money? So it's the whole business case is around testing. Can we deliver those aspects? And that is what Grant Thornton have assessed. They haven't assessed it to conclude whether yes or no, the bus franchising or EP is a better option. What they have been doing is testing the quality of that assessment. Have we used a due process against the 2017 Act? Is the information and analysis robust? And you'll see in the letter that although there are a number of observations as there have been in other areas, they have concluded that the process is robust. So obviously there's a lot of detail. There's a lot of detail in the 5 cases around the strategic case, why we're doing it. The economic case, does it deliver impact and value for money? The commercial case, can we procure it? The financial case, is it affordable? And finally, the management case about the delivery. All of that is considered in detail in the business case. But obviously what we're doing today is asking you to consider what your recommendations would be to the board, whether you would be considering approving them to recommend, whether you're content to recommend the approval of the business case, the approval of the Grant Thornton letter, and the consideration of going out to public consultation. We're obviously happy to take any questions about both the assessment, the papers, but also the consultation process of the members today, Chair, and I'll pause there.
Thank you. So a couple of things just to frame this. First of all, if we do need to move into exempt session, I want to do that en bloc. So I'm looking at people around me to let me know if we start verging into things that need to go exempt. And at that point, I will ask you to stop, make a note of what you were going to say, and we can come back to it. The other thing is, Judith, I wonder if you could just give us a bit of clarification around recommendation A, just from the point of view, it's quite a hefty business case. And when we say kind of that we're approving it in a lay term rather than having to have that kind of input that an auditor has in effect already had. Is that correct?
Yes, Chair, I can confirm that the Bus Services Act requires that we have an independent audit. They have completed that work. And in terms of the board and committee being satisfied that it has been done in a robust and appropriate manner, obviously you have the ability to reflect on the Grant Thornton work and then conclude that they have confirmed that it has been done in a robust manner.
I'm sure that will come as a relief to all of us in the room. Okay. Questions and comments, please. Sorry, Councillor Shaler.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just very quickly, clearly the government is kind of in our corner now, and this process has been going on for some time. The same sort of question: does it change what we're doing? Do we know if there's more money? Do we know if there are less risks, fewer risks, and should we be more ambitious? I noticed that they say that they will help us do this sort of thing, but even to the extent of public ownership. But anything that gives us a little bit more control that will allow us to build a network that take passengers to train stations and all of the stuff that we want to do, obviously, I'm in favour of.
Who else at this point? Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome this. Certainly in the last 18 months in Huntingdonshire, we've been at the sharp end of some challenges from our residents about bus arrangements. Critical routes people rely upon have been withdrawn seems mainly for commercial reasons with minimal notice. So we definitely need reform, and I think franchising, if that were to be the case, puts us in a strong position. I know this is not a decision on routes today, but what input will we have into that at some future stage? Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Councillor Jamil.
Thank you, Chair. As someone who's come into this relatively new, and I'm sure all of us have been lobbied with, the various groups are wanting this. And as someone from Peterborough, city centre, where, we're well looked after. However, I also have to consider the people who live in rural Peterborough as well. And they've not been looked after over the years. The amount of times we've had to fight for buses to be put back in, I just feel that for us, this paper gives us an opportunity to take back control that we lost all those years ago. And I, for one, will be looking to support franchising or looking to go out to consultation. And then you never know what may come up as a result of the consultation. But for me, I just think it's a once in a generation opportunity, and we should be grasping it hands full.
It's not compulsory, but I'm just checking who else wants to speak.
Yes, I'll come in. The confidential papers, they've lost in my system. I'm trying to resurrect them. Yes, I've got concerns about funding, certainly, on this, and how it affects the rural areas, and certainly routes is one of the things that were discussed by Councillor Sanderson there. So yes, I've got concerns, but I'm sure they'll get drawn out as we debate. I'm in favour of improving the bus services, so that's a given. But I've just got concerns about how we fund it.
Thank you. And Judith, I might be helpful for a clarification to make sure I've got this right in my head, that what is being proposed here to go out to consultation is kind of more of a mechanism for control and increasing the ability of the combined authority to control a network rather than a vision for a new set of bus routes per se. So it might be useful just to get some clarification around that.
Excellent. Yes, thank you. And thank you for all of those wide-ranging questions. So yes, I think actually to clarify what the question is that would be going out to public consultation might be a helpful place to start, and then we can work through some of the other comments. So as you can see from the business case assessment, it sets out that in the medium investment case, their preference is that the business case sets out the case for franchising. And what we will be asking in the consultation is a whole set of questions around the franchising agenda. So it isn't it won't simply be, are you in favour, yay or nay? It will be a far more wide-reaching set of consultation. So each person will be given the opportunity of completing 10 or so questions to provide their comments on a whole wide range of things, which will then allow people to articulate their thoughts on, for instance, networks, for instance, rurality, for instance, how it impacts them in the city centre. So they will have an opportunity to express a whole range of issues, both on an EP model, a franchising model, and I'm sure there will be much besides. In addition to that, there will be statutory consultees because we are bound by the law in terms of who we need to talk to about this. So the bus operators will also be contacted and provided the opportunity to complete a full questionnaire. And I think their questionnaire includes over 40 questions to ensure a full response from those people that are engaged at that level and wish to provide a full response in that way. And clearly it will be beholden on us to make sure that we are engaging people in as many ways as possible, that as many people as possible, as many businesses as possible have the opportunity to engage in the process and set out their views on those questionnaires through in-person and electronic opportunities. So hopefully that just sets out a little bit about both the way it will be run, the type of question, and also our ambition for involving as many people as possible. To get to the questions that I've been asked, starting with Councillor Shaler and the new government position. So as you say, one of those 5 priorities is around bus franchising. And so it very much the government is moving in the direction of extending the opportunity of bus franchising to other places. At the moment, it's restricted to just mayoral combined authorities. And what the government's looking at is extending that to county councils and others. So that's obviously the direction of travel. And there seems to be a recognition that that picture of the deregulated market that I briefly set out not working, that you've all been talking about, is being widely recognised, with alternatives being looked at. In terms of how that change of government position and as set out in those 5 priorities is going to impact on us, it's too early to tell. But I can absolutely confirm that we've engaged with at both officer level. So I have spoken to the Deputy Director in DFT about how, you know, we can work with DFT to look at both the process and sort of going forward into the details to both share with them our experiences and see if we can help ourselves move along the path successfully if the public consultation suggested that that was a direction of travel that we would want to move in. So we're very much having those conversations, but it's too early to answer at the moment. In terms of the position about the building the network, so I think it's perhaps just worth stressing that the network that is in the business case is the current network. because when we did the analysis, if you change, so in any kind of mathematical model, if you change too many variables, you can't see what's driving what. So what we were advised by the auditors to do is base the analysis on the existing network, and then you can compare models on the existing network. And that was part of their test of robustness, being clear on where we are. So the next question that then fits with is the kind of point about how are decisions made about the network going forward. So clearly, if franchising was put forward, then if it went ahead, there would have to be a process of identifying the precise network that was included within the remit. And any of you that have looked at the franchising agreement document in the appendices will see that there is a list of different routes, etc., that could be included. That isn't the final list by any means, but that's the basis on which the assessment has been calculated. But clearly there would be decisions that needed to be taken about what the future network would look like. And then obviously that would then include all of the questions we talked about before. Is that network then able to deliver those objectives? What impact would it make? And is it good value for money? How would we procure it? Potentially, we'd be breaking it up into lots and procuring different parts on a phased basis, as they have done in other areas. Rob would be very much looking at, the financial affordability. How can we bring other dimensions in? If there were government funding available, that will make the sums a little bit easier, clearly. And then we'd also be looking at the management. How many people do we need in what positions to make this work? And clearly, in other places, they've made decisions to set up, obviously Transport for London has a separate arm's length body from the GLA that runs their transport. So there need to be a consideration of exactly what that looks like. But the early steps would be to look at those routes that would be part of a future model. What we're not bound by is, once if and when a decision was made, then we would have to look at what is the exact pot of money and what are the routes that we could support using the principles of the bus strategy and the network that clearly the CPCA board members and committee members wanted to bring about. I'm just looking down my notes to pick up any other issues. So I think that would be included in I think when I'm talking about the network, I've probably picked up some of the areas about the city centre and rural areas. And obviously that commitment to looking at the network would be a vital part of that. And I think the last question from Councillor Sharp about the funding. So in the testing of the business case, we've had to look very hard at the affordability question. And obviously there is a high amount of data in the business case that looks at the various scenarios of the costs, the income, and the profile of spend over. So if there's any specific questions, obviously my colleague Rom Ebery is here to answer those, because it's really important dimension of the business case in terms of our considerations, and that will be part of what goes into the public consultation as well.
Thank you. I just did want to clarify one thing you raised earlier, Judith. So where you talked about the new government's direction of travel being around other authorities such as county councils also being able to franchise, that is county councils where they are the transport authority. So we are not facing a situation where potentially in a year's time there's a kind of free-for-all, that it is the transport authority which is able to franchise, and what is being looked at is the extension of those powers from what is currently only mayoral transport authorities to other parts of the country where that doesn't happen. So just to be really clear on that, I just wanted to, now I'm trying really hard to be very factual, so please shout at me quickly if I move away from being that. But my understanding of what is being presented to us is that there are costs in the current network, as we've seen over 2 years, for example, of setting budgets that respond to gaps in the network, sometimes through cuts that have happened at quite the last minute. So one of the things that my understanding is that a franchise system, and that what we're being suggested in the business case, is that it allows us to be more proactive in our response to those financial constraints, which, to go back, Councillor Sharp, to your questions around rural travel, allows us to take that strategic initiative with our rural travel rather than having to be more reactive in terms of the actions of a commercial operator. Now, that's not to be in any way undermining of the quality of the operators that we have, but it is the reality that we are not allowed as it stands to run a commercially viable service. So the only way for us to be able to set a strategic overall set of routes is to have a different governance model, so that in effect, what seems to be coming through to me in what we're looking at is that our consideration allows us to make, we're looking at a model that allows us to make best use of what we have, absolutely bearing in mind that Transport for London gets significantly more funding as it stands than the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority does for transport, but it's about being able to have that kind of control. So, and could you also, Judith, just confirm for us that this isn't a kind of sign on the dotted line and you are committed to these costs and nobody get this, the ongoing spending decisions would still be subject to the same decision-making processes that they are now. We're not kind of pre-committing future budgets here. It's those decisions would be ongoing.
Correct. And I'll perhaps ask my colleague, Rob, to come in on that point as well. I thought it might just be helpful to confirm what you were saying, Chair, regarding the franchising model and how it compares with the enhanced partnership. In particular, we've spoken that an enhanced partnership model really builds upon the existing way of operating buses now. So currently we run about 12% of the bus services on the network. And obviously we work with the bus operators as we can to try and have some influence over that wider network. And we really do try and engage as effectively as we can. The model that we would have with a franchise would be quite different to that, in that instead we would be running the bus services. So we would hold the ring and we would go out to procure the bus services. So we would be setting the standards for the services for the vehicles. We could, for instance, have a network branding such as the B network that people may be aware of in Manchester. We would be setting the fares and any discounts, running the kind of ticketing services and so on. So we would be holding, if there were operators running the bus network, we would have to hold them to account. It would give us the ability to, if there were some services that were in surplus, they could then cross-subsidise other services. And clearly we would be keen to do that because, you know, that's not something we're able to do at the moment. And what it should allow, we would be looking at procuring services over a 7-year period. So obviously it was mentioned earlier in the comments that services have come and gone very quickly with little notice. In a franchising model, that wouldn't be possible because you'd have those 7-year contracts. Obviously there might be change at that point and there might be decisions that the body would need to make, but you would have greater stability in the system, and that's one of the objectives. So that hopefully just teases out some of the differences between the enhanced partnership and the franchising model. But the point that the chair makes regarding decision making, which I will then pass over to Rob, is absolutely critical. All that's being asked of the committee and indeed the board is to adopt the business plan, the Grant Thornton letter, and go out to public consultation. But even when that process was complete, if there was then a decision to go out to franchising, the annual budget setting of the authority would continue. And at that point, I'm going to hand over to the Deputy Section 73 officer.
Just before that, so I just wanted to confirm and clarify one thing that you said, where you were talking about cross-subsidy. So whereas the situation we have at the moment is that if we pick up a service, a non-commercial service, we are putting all the money into that and we cannot pull money in from anywhere else. We can't pick money out from a more commercially viable route and bring it into that service. Under a franchise model, we would be able to do that. So we would be able to operate a service that potentially made a surplus, and that surplus could then be brought in to support those routes that were not making a surplus. So there would be arguably a prudency around that.
Yes, and to add to that, Chair, for the clarity of the committee, obviously the services that CPCA tend to run at the moment are very marginal services. They're services that commercial operators generally have chosen not to operate. So we're rarely in a situation of surplus. And obviously you colleagues around the table will have seen subsidy levels at this meeting previously and be aware of that. Obviously, in the future, in a franchise model, if that was what was agreed to be the way forward, we would have the opportunity of running the services that do indeed run a surplus, and we would then be able to consider reinvesting that in services that don't, in order to bring the benefits of that connectivity to rural places that perhaps are underserved by the bus network.
Okay, thank you. Rob, do you want to add anything to that?
Not a great deal to add, actually, because Judith covered it correctly. The decision before the committee today financially only really commits the cost of doing the consultation. In terms of any decisions in the future about what the network would look like and therefore the knock-on implications of cost, those would go through the combined authorities governance processes at the time. And similarly, the then obvious question of how do you fund those decisions would come through the budget planning process of the combined authority, which would stay as it is now unless the board chose to change them.
Thank you. Neil, you look like you want to. Councillor Shaler.
Oops, just I'm asking for some clarification on the timeline. If we go through this now and go to the consultation, when is the first moment that we could actually get to, say, franchising?
So just to sort of talk the committee through a kind of indicative timeline, if a decision was made to go to public consultation on the 24th of July, then we'd be looking to start that consultation in early August. That would then run, it's been discussed, we would run for a 14-week period. We have to statutorily do a 12-week period, but August is never a good time. So we've decided to kind of extend that. So that would sort of take us towards the middle of November. So that would give, I hope, really considerable amount of time for both businesses and communities across the area to engage in the process. There would then need to be a consultation report. So all of the responses to both the statutory consultees and the wider public would need to be considered and written into a report, which has to come back to the board. So we'd need to look at the timings. Clearly, we could be a victim of our own success with lots of response. So the better the response, the bigger the report. However, when that report is then concluded, then it is a mayoral decision to make about whether to franchise or not, having considered all of that report thoroughly. If that decision was made in early 2025, the current schedule suggests that we would be introducing the first franchise services in September 2027, which does sound a long time, but clearly there is considerable setup costs to move from where we are to where we would need to be. Including legal processes of procurement and mobilising contracts, and also considering such things as service permit schemes with, for instance, out of area buses, because we don't obviously operate in an island. So there's many things to consider, but it would be September 2027 according to our current projections.
Tom, Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I understand this went to the overview and scrutiny panel, and should we just discuss what they recommended, what they deliberated on as part of our decision?
Yes, so we do have the rapporteur, apologies, is with us today. They decided not to make a formal submission to the board. I hope I'm recalling that correctly, Councillor Bradnan. but they did go in some detail about a number of different issues within the business case. We gave them the same presentation that was available to TIC members last week, and there was some consideration, particularly on the affordability questions, which Rob was asked to respond to. There was a particular area of the debate, I think the longest part of the debate was actually on the consultation process itself and how that could successfully engage people. And there was a feeling that it was very important to make sure that that process was open, thorough, wide-reaching, that information was provided that was accessible, that there was multiple routes for people to be able to participate. It wasn't over-reliant on electronic debate, but there was also the possibility of, for instance, it reaching people who were at bus stops in bus stations, as well as the kind of social media and other routes that you might engage. There was a significant part of the discussion was around that. And we were left with a number of things that we took away from that consultation, which I have since been feeding in to the communication consultation planning, which we have as a twice weekly meeting. So that's how I would summarise it. But I don't know, Rob, whether you would like to add anything from your perspective of that meeting.
Could I ask a clarification around timeline, which that was really helpful for us to hear that. I'm aware that the board would, of course, be discussing the results of any consultation should we choose to go to consultation. Would it also come to a TIC committee for us to look at as well?
Absolutely, that's my understanding. Apologies, that was just shorthand to the board.
Right, would anyone else like to come in at this point? And I guess, crucially, is there anything that we need to discuss in exempt session? I have to say, I find we've all been skirting beautifully around anything that requires us to go into exempt but with Judith, I have to admire the way that you've given us so much detail without nonetheless making me close everything down and sending people out. So thank you very much for kind of some very well chosen and helpful words there. This is your last opportunity to make any comments. So I did just want to follow up that quite a lot of in terms of the operation of the consultation, should the decision be made, it'll be really good to work out how we can ensure that that has a wide demographic scope. I'm very concerned that some of the big statutory consultations that have taken place, not necessarily within the combined authority, but more broadly across the region as well, have taken place. It's been the young people responding. You're talking about 1 or 2%, and that's really concerning. So it'd be good to know if there are ways in which we're trying to deal with that.
Thank you, Chair. Within the terms of the Bus Services Act, we have to be, we are actually guided to how we run this consultation, and it does specify that we need to reach bus users, potential bus users. And of course, many bus users, are absolutely the young people, hopefully using the Tiger card. So yes, we need to make sure that we use all available channels. We will be having kind of pop-up sessions around the area, including at sort of bus stops and bus stations, to try and engage. Now, we obviously are aware that a lot of the information is complex. And I have to admit that all of the documents that you have received in that document pack have to go into the public domain, which is clearly, it's a lot of information to wade through. So clearly, we will be producing a longer summary and a shorter summary, as well as sort of flyers and so on, that allow people to engage at a lighter touch and hopefully are aware of the process, and then we can build on that and answer their questions as they go through, because clearly part of the journey is going to be able to make it understandable, because clearly not everybody is going to find the time to engage with all 360 pages, because I know I personally have found that a big commitment to go through that detail. So we are very committed to that wide demographic. We are looking as well at how we speak to representative bodies. We spoke earlier, Councillor Jamil, about people who are focused on issues around accessibility. We're talking to groups, particularly targeting around those as well. So there is a focus on statutory consultees, but we are also looking at a very sophisticated market segmentation. One of the things the Institute of Consultation is actually asking us to do as well is to undertake some analysis, both quantitative and qualitative, as we go through the exercise, in order that we don't have a situation that at the beginning of November we find we haven't contacted the right people. So during the process, we will be able to see who we're engaging. And actually, if we find out that for instance, a particular group or a particular location doesn't seem to have engaged, then we're going to be able to respond to that challenge. So I think it's going to be absolutely beholden on officers to make sure that we are doing that. And I'm sure we'll be able to bring a report tick to explain where we are on that journey so that you can have some oversight of the success of the consultation.
It's really helpful. And we have had this signed off by an independent kind of consultation body, haven't we, as well?
We haven't yet, but we're in that process. So yes, we're working with the Institute of Consultation so that they sign off the materials and provide us advice. And they did the same thing for Manchester, Liverpool and West Yorkshire. So we're hoping to build on their practice.
Thank you. And of course, many of us will be aware that some of the other authorities have annoyingly already gone down this. But we are obviously able to learn from other authorities and the things that they have found helpful and unhelpful in those processes, which I know that you have been working hard to discuss their methodologies so that we are able, should we go to consultation, to be able to apply their learning too. And I think that's very helpful. Councillor Sharp.
I'll come in there. Just touch on a couple of things Judy said. In terms of the consultation, it's a question of reaching out. And I mean, some colleagues here will be aware I've been publicly very critical of the GCP in terms of their consultations. Touching on what you said about obviously, getting feedback from bus users and potential bus users. It's also important, again, where there's no buses at the moment. Going back to the, obviously I represent East Cambs and I'm near to Newmarket, so I'm not as rural as other colleagues. But if you look at Fenland, where some of the Fenland villages, where there aren't any buses, it's a question of how we reach out to them. And I think that's so important in the consultation. Because again, I go back to, and I'm trying to skirt around the exempt items. I'm very, it's mentioned, it's touched on in the public paper, but the funding side of it is still my concern. Because I think personally, if we go out to consultation, we've got to be as public, as honest as we can be with people that this is, if you say, yes, I want this, this is where the money's going to come from. I'm not saying we haven't done that, but I understand why it's in exempt, but it's just, I'll leave it there because I don't want to veer into and get told off.
And I should say that the only reason I'm asking around exempt is so that I know when I have to clear the room, it is not because we cannot discuss exempt items. If we need to go into exempt session, we can absolutely do that. So if at any point people do wish to discuss items on that, I'm more than happy to take us into exempt session.
Yeah, from a personal point of view, I'm happy. I don't need to go into exempt to mention that, but yeah, I think I'll leave it there. Yeah.
Judith, do you need to come back on any of that?
Yes, so you made the point about reaching out to people who aren't currently able to use the bus services. So there's a couple of things that we can say that relate to your point, and you also mentioned GCP. We had a session with GCP to understand the previous consultations that have happened, and learn from that. So I hope, we're really, clearly there's always time to learn. It's important to learn. I'm sure it won't be perfect, but we're really doing our best to learn from other places and other projects. In terms of one of the things we are doing, we're actually looking at sort of direct mail outs and focus groups, because that does give us a little bit of the opportunity. If we haven't heard from a particular place or a particular group of people, then we can target that group. We can also obviously look at, ways of reaching out to representative bodies. Another thing that's happening, my colleague Ed Coleman, who's the head of comms, he is meeting with the heads of comms at each constituent local authority to try and use those networks to reach kind of parish councils and others who could perhaps represent those views and perhaps say if people aren't engaging or have a sense of whether it's being talked about. So we're trying to use all those channels, and hopefully the 14 weeks gives us enough time to get that feedback and then respond to it. Obviously, Rob is available if you did have any questions on the affordability, but understand that you might not want to take those at this time.
Just to come back on that, and I'm at the wrong end of the spectrum, but I think certainly in other consultations we've done, it's been very noticeable of the lack of younger people contributing. And so I'm the wrong end, but we need to get we need to get everybody engaged, but certainly getting younger people involved in a consultation, what they want and what they need, encourage them to use the public transport, I think is very important.
Exactly. I think that those are really helpful points made, and thank you for that. And what I would say is if you get a sense of people coming to yourselves as members of the committee saying, well, we haven't heard anything about this and how can it be shared more widely, I think I'd be quite confident in speaking for officers to say, please let us know that should we go to consultation, keep making sure I'm saying that, but let us know during any consultation that does happen, rather than we get to the end and discover there are groups that haven't been heard from. And if you are getting in touch with officers, and that's by email, please do copy me in as well so that I can help chase up on your behalf too. I think it's really important that we do everything we can to capture a wide range of views here. I think that's something we all agree on. Now, is there anything else anyone would like to ask or raise? Andy, is there anything you want to bring from a kind of business board perspective here?
Not at this point. I think what I'm hearing is that we're preparing a document for consultation. I'll be encouraging the business board to respond to that consultation. There have been some previous businesses who've responded to their view on franchising, but let's wait and see that back through the consultation. It's all positive. I just think it's probably not the time to be really going into the detail of those.
Thank you. So if there are no further questions, we will now move to the vote. I will propose. Who would like to second? Oh, who do you think got in first there? I'm not sure. I think Councillor Sanderson has yet to second something, so I'll go with him. Can I see those in favour? So that is 4 in favour. Can I see those against? Can I see those abstaining? Now, my understanding is that that fulfills the 2/3 of members present and the representatives from both the Cambridgeshire County Council and Peterborough City Council. Therefore, that vote is carried, and we will be able to take this reported through with the other decisions from TIC today to the board on Wednesday. Now, I believe, as we've got everything else, that is now the conclusion of the committee. Thank you very much indeed for your time. I really appreciate that. Thank you again to our officers who have been supporting this. And I always forget to say thank you to our fantastic audiovisual team as well for getting us online and making sure everyone can see it. So thank you. The meeting is over. Thank you very much.